Welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset. I'm Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc. And today we have another exciting guest who I think you'll learn a lot from, Dr. Jack Goetz. Not only is Dr. Jack a mediator, but he also has a doctorate in education as well as a Juris Doctorate licensed in law. Right there, that says a lot about how important licensure and certification are to someone like Jack. Jack has such an avid interest in adult learning that he founded the first online law school, now run by Purdue University. He invests and contributes significant dollars in the form of scholarships to adults in need to help them continue to advance their education. Today, Jack and I are going to explore this whole notion about certification as a professional mediator and how other professions have been enhanced, lifted up, recognized as truly legitimate professions. Certified financial planners, certified divorce financial analysts. And yet mediation is an area that remains uncredentialed, uncertified. He has been dedicating a good deal of the last few years working in close cooperation with Southern California Mediation Institute to found MC3, a nonprofit organization that has dedicated significant time and research to really laying the ground rules for what it takes to achieve certification as a mediator. I should know, I'm going through it right now. But really looking to MC3 as being the gold standard for mediation certification. So listen and learn, find out how to become certified as a professional mediator, and join the ranks of professional practitioners in many different fields. This one's all about mediation. Stay tuned, we're going to get started very shortly. You'll learn a lot. I'm happy to have Dr. Jack Goetz. Welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset. I'm Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc, your host. And with me today is Jack Goetz. Welcome, Jack. I'm so glad to have you, Dr. Jack Goetz.
Oh, thank you so much, Deborah, for inviting me. I'm honored to be on the program.
Well, great. Well, I'm looking forward to learning more about what's called MC3 and what that means to the world of mediation, and particularly to heighten our awareness and enlighten some pathways that we can follow to help people, like I say, decode the conflict mindset. Okay?
Fantastic.
So, Great. Well, Jack, I'm excited, that you're at USC now, and you've been there now since 2015, right?
Yes, I have.
Well, great. It's a great program, and I've been honored to speak there a few times myself. And let me go ahead and share with our viewers and listeners a little bit more about your background, Jack, because it's really rich, and I think, knowing a little bit more about what you've done in the past will help, enlighten our listeners too to some of the things that you bring to the table and why this is such an important passion for you.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, I know before going to USC, you also led and founded a 100-hour mediation training certificate program that you created in 2009. And you were with Cal State Northridge and Dominguez Hills while teaching that program.
Absolutely right.
Great. So you've got quite the academic background here, because I see too that you offered a mediation training program for the Los Angeles Police Department Office of the Ombuds. And I guess that later rose to the LA County Bar Association, and where they took its training programs in the last couple of years.
For those two, we have a nonprofit company known as Education Solutions for Change. And we've just recently entered into an engagement for the Riverside Community College District, where we'll do conflict training for their leadership teams.
Wonderful. You also, I know, have been instrumental on a professional level with our association, the Southern California Mediation Association. And tell us a little bit more about your background with them.
I've worked actively within the field ranks. I mean, my background, if you go back to it, has always been about creating career options for adults. And when I first left what I was doing, which was administrative work, I served as president of a couple universities. I moved on to become a full-time mediator and arbitrator, and got readily involved in Southern California Mediation Association. So I worked on teams with SCMA since really 2008, which culminated in me being on the board and also being president of the association in 2018, and continue to this day to be actively at every board meeting. Really enjoy the work that SCMA does in the field in advancing the field and what I would like to see becoming a profession. So yes, it's been a long and rich history at SCMA.
Well, that's absolutely great, because I know that that's where I met you, was through SCMA events throughout Southern California, and I've been pleased to serve on the board with you as well. And Jack, your educational background and business background is just phenomenal. I just want to say a couple more things before we launch into you telling us more about MC3, but to see that you were recognized by the LA Superior Court ADR program as outstanding volunteer in 2011. That's pretty amazing. And gosh, you've been on the Distance Education Accrediting Commission, overseeing accreditation compliance, and as you've said, you've long been an advocate of mediation and doing a lot to help further its development into a truly legitimate form of profession. I know it sometimes amazes me, and I think back, 20, 30 years ago, when I got started, that it's like, are we still sort of battling this battle, and getting it recognized, getting it, eminent up there with licenses like we have for lawyers and psychologists and doctors and things like that, and because it plays a very valuable role. And so thank you for your efforts in doing that.
Absolutely. And just to mention sort of parenthetically, because you'll see how it ties in, I'm actually most known for being the first developer of an online law school. It was called Concord Law School. It's now run by Purdue University. But I was initially created online education for law students. It was a little bit laughed out of the room in 1997 when we first created it, but of course took a lot of pride in 2020 during COVID, when every law school in the nation was online and issuing grades, things that they said couldn't be done in 1997. So again, the way it ties into mediation is my career, although largely has been as an entrepreneur in business, as you've noted, is about creating options for adults and career options for adults. And that's how that fits in, and that's how my current work at MC3 fits in.
Well, that's wonderful. I well identify with that whole online approach. I used to teach for National University, and when I first started back in like 2006 or 7, everything was in person, so on. And then they made that switch, or the shift, I should say, to online. And at first I'm going, how can I teach conflict resolution? How can I teach communication skills? How can I teach, the conflict theory online, because you think, as many of us thought, you had to be in person. And so I made that shift very early, in the even before 2010, teaching online. So for me, the transition into what became our Zoom world in 2020 was in a way a no-brainer for me, because I'd already been at it for quite a long time. It sounds like you have too. So kudos.
Thank you. Yes, considered an early online educator, 1997, 1998. We didn't really have bandwidth for video online. So, some of the first iterations of Concord Law School were all on audio. But we were able to make the transition, and now Concord Law School is going strong under the Purdue University Global banner.
Wow, that's wonderful. Because I remember giving a presentation at Stanford a few years ago, and the president of Stanford at that point was really pushing, on global online education, and talking about, making education available in any corner of the world. And I thought that was just pretty amazing. That was 2013, and again, boy, have we come a long way since, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Jack, I'm really excited to, I know MC3 has been around for a while, but please give us some of its historical roots, shall we say, and what's launched this, and where do we see it going, and how do we see it impacting our field of development and dispute resolution?
Wow, that's huge. But let me give you the historical roots. And so SCMA had a large part in this. So we talked about the Southern California Mediation Association. I was initially part of a task force that in 2013 was commissioned by SCMA to try to research what should be done in the field of mediation. There was an aborted attempt in 2012 for the State Bar of California to regulate mediators. Fortunately, that did not work. It did not legislatively get through. But SCMA thought that within their wisdom, they ought to figure out what should be done. And our task force worked diligently for SCMA through 2013, produced a white paper which recommended certification, voluntary mediator certification, which is where MC3 ended up, proposed a model. SCMA then further commissioned us for the next 2 years to work on that model, go throughout the state of California at the time to try to vet some of the standards and some of the things that we had talked about in the certification model. And by 2015, it was evident that we had vetted it pretty well and it could very well work, but SCMA was not prepared to launch a business based upon that. We did form MC3 as a nonprofit organization in 2015, but we did not launch until 2019. And MC3 is, so we're less than 3 years old, but we've been working on it for a long time. And how MC3 is different, it's voluntary mediator certification. And so you can work as a mediator, not be part of MC3, but MC3 attempts to elevate the field of mediation from a field to a profession. And what do you need for a profession? Well, if you go through law, accounting, medical, if you go through all those, you need a certain modicum of education. Oftentimes, if it's regulated, you have to pass a test. But again, we went for a certification model, which is not state regulated. You have to have a binding ethics code, which all MC3 mediators agree to. And other mediators have not necessarily bound themselves to an ethics code. And then you have to have an independent, neutral, very similar to our mediations. So the concept that we all buy off on in mediation is what MC3 does. Independent certification body. So a lot of other organizations that give out certifications basically educate you and then they certify you. It's a bit of a, as a colloquial put, a no-brainer. We've taught you, therefore you must be good. MC3 does not do its own education. MC3 evaluates education produced by other organizations and works collegially and collaboratively with those organizations, and then independently certifies mediators based upon background checks, their agreement to an ethics code, everything they've done, both the practice standards and otherwise. And so that's the idea, a nonprofit, third-party neutral to independently certify, which is what's needed for a field like mediation to elevate itself to a profession.
Oh, that's fascinating. And I remember that push for state regulation of mediators a few years back. And part of me welcomed it, and then part of me was like, I don't know that this is the way to go either, And so I'm glad to see how MC3 stepped in and was fostered by Southern California Mediation Association. I guess, when we think about public perception of mediation, and I know that's one thing, we're trying to increase and advocate, is a better understanding of just what is mediation. But I guess, what are your thoughts as far as, how to make people aware of, mediation really being that first call to conflict resolution?
Well, that's exactly at the heart of the MC.
Mm-hmm.
So if you really look at professions, what makes a public member comfortable with calling a doctor's office? What makes somebody comfortable with calling an accountant's office? What makes somebody comfortable with these various professions? You'll get back to the basic. There's some third-party source that in those cases has licensed the accountant or the doctor or whatever. But in our case, have certified that they abide by an ethical code and they do some things. So the reality of it is, until we take that step in mediation, it's going to be really hard for the public to make that call, to have the assurance that they're not calling just somebody just based upon, Sally said and Joe said and DeAndre said, and it's not that way. Now, we know that mediation has been largely adopted by lawyers in the litigated case field, and that's because oftentimes it's court commanded or and decided for them. But in many other fields where there's many other disputes, it is largely not adopted. If you walked into any small claims court in this country and started talking about mediation, frankly, most people in the audience don't know the difference between a mediator and a meditator. But I mean, quite frankly, they could be the same individual. But my jokes aside, the reality of it is, why doesn't the public know? If you ask that same public, what does an accountant do? What does a nurse do? What does a doctor do? They could reasonably tell you what those things. And the reason is because we've never actually described ourselves for the public, that they would be comfortable in making that first call. So every field started out as a field, and some elevate to professions and some haven't. But I'll give you an example of certification that works. 50 years ago, you wouldn't have thought about what you could do if you had substantial assets and how do you invest the assets? What do you do? Who knows what to do? Maybe a brokerage house knows what to do. Now there's a whole group called certified financial planners. Certified financial planners are well established. They're not regulated by any state, but you have some quality assurance in the standards set by the certification unit that you're comfortable in going to them for advice about financial inquiries. That's what we're trying to create with MC3. Is it a long time? Yes, Deborah. It's not going to happen overnight. The Certified Financial Planners has certainly been, it's over 50 years old. It takes time, but you got to start somewhere. And MC3 is hopefully the start of somewhere.
Well, I remember when the Certified Financial Planners was developing, because my younger brother actually pursued that route, with an extensive background in accounting and wanted to do more than just public accounting. And so I was really proud of him when he got that, because it was brand new and sort of untested waters at the time. So, yeah. Well, I'm curious then, I've certainly, I haven't completed the process yet, I admit that. But I figure after I get done with this next trip in this next week, then I'm going to have more time to do that. But so I am familiar with the process. But do describe what does someone go through then in looking at MC3 certification?
There's natural steps to the process. One, you have to have the education background. So MC3 has certain education standards. Our field is not yet ready to have the degree as the launching point. But I will say over 2/3 of our mediators do have a postgraduate degree in conflict resolution or have a JD degree. So there is something to it. But our field's not ready for that, so we don't require a postgraduate degree, but we require a lot of mediation training, a lot more than anybody else would. And then there's some look at your practical experience and, what have you done in the field and, how many hours. We have a certain amount of hours, which is 50 hours minimum that you would have had to be in the field. And then we have continuing education requirements similar to other professions. Someone can't just qualify to be a mediator and then just say, okay, I'm done. They have to keep up on the field. So every 3 years, they have to be recertified based upon what continuing education they've done. And in addition, we do a background check. It's like an employment background check on every person who applies, so they will have to go through a background check, and they have to agree to a binding ethics code, and they sign off on it. And so that means if a public member has a problem with the ethical advice that's given or the ethical guidance during the mediation, they have an organization to complain to. We have a grievance process, and we can investigate that. Obviously, we're not interested, and nor could we really interfere with the results of the mediation. That is what it is. But so there's a lot of different levels. Does it take, as you know already, does it take hours perhaps to put together an application? Yes, but you wouldn't want it any other way. The public wouldn't want it any other way. Otherwise, then we don't really serve our purpose. We only ask for the information that's relevant, but people are going to have to detail it. So they have to pull out their education, they have to pull out their background. They do have to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I have to admit, as I started going through it a couple months ago, and this, I just have to put this aside because I have other things going on. But yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, I have not, seen this kind of scrutiny, quite honestly, for, gosh, I'm trying to think of the last time, because I'm licensed in the state of California, of course, as a therapist, and have gone through lots of advanced education. And so it was a little bit daunting, I have to admit, but like you said, is that the public can, be well assured that this isn't just somebody who's, putting up a shingle saying mediator, here, come and use my services, but that there is actually, very significant scrutiny and evaluation of credentials and education and experience and so forth, so that, again, as we continue to, enhance and grow visibility of the field, that, again, people know that there are skilled and qualified people. I know that there are many people have this notion that to be a mediator, you have to be an attorney. And care to say any more on that one?
Well, again, obviously a JD degree is helpful, particularly in a litigated case, but it doesn't mean that a person without a JD degree couldn't understand, and many do, the intricacies enough of the legal system to be able to give guidance in a litigated case. So I think studies have shown that there's no difference in results. I think there was a Ventura County study some years ago now where they evaluated thousands of cases and they found out the resolution rate was the exact same for JDs who mediated the case and those who did not have a JD. So, and we have many well-established people without JD degrees doing great work in mediation. Obviously, if the parties, it's all about self-determination of the parties. The parties really want some retired judge to come in and beat them up during a mediation. That's their choice. And some of us might not look at that as mediation. It might be more like a settlement conference that's, called mediation. But that's certainly the party choice. But if you want a mediation which involves getting interests out on the table, not just the positions of the parties, but understanding their interests and trying to formulate new ways of looking at things. Anybody with a JD, anybody without a JD are all equally qualified if they've done the mediation training, they have the experience and can readily adapt their background experience to the context of the mediation.
I think that is a very important note. I know I'm oftentimes asked, "Well, are you an attorney too?" And I think, no, but I have been mediating for about 30 years now. And so I think it's important too, as part of our, promotion and mediation as a field, as a profession, for people to realize too that not all mediations deal with, litigation aspects. There are many relationship aspects, and that's primarily where I tend to focus. And but then also, around other things that really may not have a basis in the law, but definitely is a dispute, is a conflict between two parties that need some help in reaching resolution. And so that's, I think, one of the beauties of mediation is that it can be applied to so many settings and so many different aspects. I remember early on there was a arts and antiquities mediator who specialized in that arena, and I thought, wow, talk about taking your passion and then applying, resolution strategies to that was pretty phenomenal.
Yeah. And from your background that most mediations, although it does involve a little bit about what the claim might turn out in court, that's just one of many things that needs to be evaluated. So, we have great mediators, and they don't all have JDs. But also JDs can make great mediators when they get out of their mindset of being a lawyer. They're not there to evaluate the claim unless that's what the parties want them to do.
Yeah. Well, that what you just said there just prompted me. I want to speak up on something because I'm really proud of doing this. But during the COVID years, I call myself the mindset doc, so it's all about shifting the mindset. And so I did a series of interviews with professionals, both attorney mediators and then mediators who came from different backgrounds, more of the social sciences. And 12 fascinating interviews then about the mindset shift, from being a litigator, for example, to being a mediator. And so I'd like to have you say a little bit more about that, because you certainly have been there too, as far as, what are the differences as you see it in terms of that litigator versus mediator mindset?
Well, actually, one of our admired colleagues, Ken Cloak, has written extensively on this. And I'm not sure I can add much to what he talks about, but, disputes can be settled on the basis of power. We see that, unfortunately, we can see that in Ukraine today. Disputes can also be settled on the basis of rights, which, is what the courts are there for. If you have certain rights, you should be able to go to court and be able to litigate that. But when you're talking about how we like to settle disputes, it's on the basis of interest. What are the parties interested in? And you dig down deep enough on every dispute, whether it's in court or not in court. There's all sorts of in-betweens that can justify the party's interest. And so I would just say and provide a collaborative future for the disputants, whatever that may be. So again, the mindset difference is, just going back to your original question, is if you're there about what your rights are all about. So if you're pounding the table in mediation, my right is this, my right is that, there's a place for that. It's not mediation, it's the court. You're in the court, go ahead. If that's your right, that's certainly your right. But if you're willing to talk about what the interests are of the two sides, and if you can make that mindset jump, which is very difficult for attorneys. I wholly sympathize with how difficult it is when your case is being litigated, and now you represent your client in mediation, and you would like it to settle, but you also have to protect them in case it doesn't settle. So it's not that easy. There is studies, though, Deborah, and I think you're aware of this too, that attorneys who get conflict resolution training get better results for their clients at mediation than attorneys without conflict resolution training. I think that's very insightful, because those people have been able to make the mindset shift that you talk about. So again, it's there's a basic study in Let's Not Make a Deal, which is a very famous article about mediation a few years back. But it's obvious. I can tell the attorneys who have, in my mediations, I can tell the attorneys who have some conflict resolution training and those that don't.
Yeah, I would agree. Those are some very important studies, and again, being a psychologist too, is I feel everyone should have some psychology in their educational background, and everyone should have some conflict resolution training. Think about what a different world this would be if we knew how to better approach disputes informally as well as formally, and we'd really make a lot of headway in that regard, wouldn't we?
I think so. Although, I've been in conversations with my son where he might say something like, "Don't use that mediation lingo on me."
Right. My kid, my adult kids say that too. It's like, "Well, okay, Mom, you're not in a mediation now. Just." Well, I said, it's hard when you're used to trying to balance things out and helping each other learn each other's perspectives, and so it comes naturally. And as I like to say, I'm unconsciously competent in that area, because that's just my mindset. That's just how I approach things. Yeah. Well, I'm curious then, Jack, 'cause I know that you've been at this MC3 process for quite some time, and I guess I'm curious. You mentioned earlier that you're officially now in your third year, although you have been around a little bit longer. But what kind of impact? How successful do you see this whole MC3 certification process going, and what's happened to some of those early adopters?
Well, we've now have 36 mediators who have been certified in 6 different states. We've made extensive agreements that go across state lines, so we've expanded far beyond California. We have an agreement with the Virginia Mediation Network and some others. I think, though, for me, and of course, the entrepreneur at heart always sees that the first few years, you just want to make sure the thing works. When I developed the online law school, the big question is, would it even work? Would people emerge with greater learning? And indeed, we have a complex application process, as you've alluded to. Does it work? Can I get qualified applicants through the process? Do some people naturally get rejected during the process? All those things work. So we're now ready for whatever the next stage is, and the next stage is usually some sort of growth stage. Now that's going to hinge on a few things. One is one of our what they might call in business target markets are panels. Can we get a major panel to adopt MC3 certified mediator standards as the entry point into the panel? That's a big challenge for us because a lot of the panels are really well set in what they do, what they want to offer. However, having said that, I do believe this year we will have at least one major panel and maybe more adopt our standards. Now, again, until it happens, it hasn't happened. But I think that will be a huge point. Obviously, early adopters as independent mediators, meaning people who are not necessarily associated with a panel, that has been someone who wants to get an additional credential just to help them in the marketing of their services. And that's always going to be there. But until we get a panel or two adoption, I don't think we'll have the widespread impact. But again, it's a natural growth process that would happen now. And then when we get the panel adoption, and then when we also get a lot more independent mediators connecting with us, then I think the third, in quotes, target market is to reach out to the public. Because I think that was one of your original questions. How do we get the public to adopt mediation on a first speed dial basis? Instead of calling their lawyer, call the mediator. And I think once we have 1 and 2 sufficiently in place and made some progress, I think the next challenge is to bring that message to the public. So it's a slow process. I mean, we talked about certified financial planners being a half century in the making. And people, particularly in today's world, they want results overnight. What did you do in the last quarter? But we steadily made progress. We know it works. Now the challenge of growth is upon us.
Yeah. Well, one of the other areas that you brought up certified financial planners again is, look at what's even happened in the last 10 years in the area of divorce. We now have certified, financial divorce analysts, I think it is, the CFDAs. And so that's a whole field that's grown that really brings in specialty to the divorce process, which had not been really present before. And so I'm encouraged by that development as well, as far as mediation in the bigger picture.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what do you see as being some next steps? I mean, I know you again, a rich background in terms of, starting the first online law school, Concord Law School, and the fact that it's under Purdue is really amazing. I know you've been active in your own philanthropy by donating hundreds of thousands of dollars to deserving students in higher education. Say a little bit more about that, Jack.
Well, a lot of us, and particularly many of us in the mediation field, I'm not alone in this, feel the need to give and want to give. And so I've always been about career options for adults. Again, that's been whatever the thread goes through my life and my various iterations of my career, that's my thread. So beginning with, again, I was an early internet success story. So beginning with that, I had the opportunity to invest heavily with philanthropic organizations and giving scholarships to, qualified students, but almost always it was based upon their career aspirations and what they've done. Currently, I have a scholarship running at California State University at Northridge, which actually is a scholarship for advocates for people with disabilities. It's not a scholarship for persons with disabilities. I mean, that I'm not demeaning those scholarships, but it's for people who will advocate on their behalf. And so we have given, close to $250,000 away over the years. I mean, that spans 20 years now. But I mean, again, it's we're not Bill Gates, but we can make a difference, and we make difference on the individual level, just like in mediation. You and I make a difference with the parties in front of us. I mean, it's not going to affect maybe the global picture as much, but enough people out there doing that, it can affect the global picture. So that's what we've done, and we'll continue to do that, and we've very much enjoyed that part of us.
That's really amazing. I think that's just fantastic, and I think that speaks to something too that I want to emphasize for our listeners and viewers is that, it's mediation as a career, as a profession, often comes to someone a little later in life, after they got their feet wet doing whatever their primary job is, and I know for me, you brought up disabilities, and so having been originally a vocational rehabilitation counselor in the first decade of my career, when the Americans with Disabilities Act passed in 1990, and as we started getting into it, what does it mean? I realized, oh my gosh, I need more skills than what I had as a counselor, working with a supervisor or working with an employee, because now I suddenly did have union representatives and lawyers showing up, maybe multiple people on the part of the employer representing different facets of the organization. And that's really what stimulated me in my second decade of my career to get into mediation, because I needed more skills, and I had to search what's out there, and mediation was still pretty young in its origins back in 1993, and that's when I first trained. Yeah, so to see it grow as it has, it's really, really, really pretty amazing.
Yeah, and it continues to grow, and now the question is, can we get it beyond the litigated case? Yeah. In family law, there's some pockets where it has gotten beyond the litigated case. So, but those pockets are few and far between, and we really need to be a first dial thing, a speed dial, as it were, for the public when conflict arises, because we can be so much more effective early on in the dispute.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of an idea that when I was getting more into mediation, and particularly in the workplace, that someone partnered up with me, and we started developing what we call 411. And I can't remember how we went on to it, but it was pretty catchy. But then things happened, and we didn't quite go through with it, and lives went our different ways. But we always thought too, as being able to put it on your speed dial, 411, conflict resolution or something like that, and people would know it, And it is amazing though how long social change can take, and social recognition. And, we usually see it in about 20-year cycles. We're a little over that now, but I think we've seen different iterations of where the field is, and so much opportunity for where it can go.
There is, and hopefully MC3 will be part of that.
Yeah. And so is there any big, exciting thing coming up, Jack, that you want to let our viewers and listeners know about?
If I could, I would. But again, we're hoping that 2022 is a year of some panel adoptions, and when it's appropriate, and we're able to be the entry point for panel, we'll make public announcements about it. But we're really looking forward to 2022 being a great growth year for us.
Wonderful. Well, I'm here to support you as much as I can. That's why I wanted you to be on the show, so that viewers and listeners would learn more about that too, either as a litigator or mediator, or just a consumer of the mediation services. And so they know it's out there, it's solid, and a lot of wonderful professionals available to deliver on its services.
Thank you again, Deborah, for giving us this opportunity, and I so appreciate that you do these podcasts and allow your listeners and viewers to see what's going on in the field, the various fields. So thank you again for inviting us, and I'm honored to be here.
Well, thank you. And just one last tidbit so that people know a little bit about you, but you have lifetime admission to the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Wow, that's a whole nother story.
That is a whole nother story, but I've been a baseball person all my life, so I often go back for once a year. They induct new athletes into the Hall of Fame. I go back there, and I have some memorabilia that I donated to the Hall of Fame that they have on display. So that's what got me the lifetime membership.
Oh, okay. So Jackie said back there, so just so our listeners and viewers know where back there means.
Yeah, it's a problem for them. But Baseball Hall of Fame is located in Cooperstown, New York, which is a little bit like going back to the movie Dirty Dancing. If you ever make the trip to Cooperstown, it's like going back in time. but it's on a beautiful lake, Otsego Lake, and it's about 100 miles west of Albany, New York. So it's in the middle of summer. It's beautiful there. If anybody had an inspiration, a lot of people take their kids back there, particularly those into sports, for a little trip. Beautiful place to be.
Wow, great. Well, thank you. And I imagine a lot of people don't know this little tidbit either. I love going to Catalina Island, and in Avalon, at the municipal golf course, if you can get your way back, but there's a whole bar that goes back to the Cubs days when Wrigley, used to fly the Cubs to Catalina Island to do their spring practice, and so what was the baseball field is now where the fire department is. But it's just tremendous memorabilia, the old dark wood, that just throws you right back to the 20s and 30s. It's amazing if you can ever get into the municipal golf course on Catalina Island. So
beautiful place.
Yeah, great history. Well, I want to just say, Jack, thank you so much. This has been so informative, and both professionally, but also educationally, in terms of like sort of a public service statement to our community out there in terms of what mediation can do, what mediators are about, and we've touched a little bit on the different applications of mediation to not only the litigated issues, but also some of the other relationship issues that may not be found in law but still need resolution. So thank you again, Jack.
Thank you so much, Deborah.
Real quickly, how do people contact you if they want to reach out and find out more?
www.mc3certified.org.
Okay.
That's the best place. So mc3certified.org.
Okay, great. So mc3certified.org. That's the place to go and check it out. And I will have my application to you soon. Okay.
We look forward to it.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc, your host of Decoding the Conflict Mindset. Tune in, subscribe, come back, and listen for more. Continuing on the vein of mediation, we're taking a slightly different turn from certification to technology. And I am so delighted to have coming up as our next guest in 2 more weeks, Colin Rule. Colin is actually a leader in the field of online dispute resolution. In fact, originating the practice and design of eBay's online dispute resolution. In fact, that collaborative effort with eBay took him from the East Coast to the West Coast. Not only did Colin develop this whole process for eBay, but he's done a number of entrepreneurial startups in the field of technology. And in fact, he's going to talk about more than just Zoom, using emerging technologies for dispute resolution. So stay tuned. If you haven't already, subscribe. You'll want to listen in on what Colin has to say and some of the insights of where the field is going. It's very interesting. So come on back. Again, put it on your calendar. 2 more weeks. We'll see you there. Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc.